case of Christina Woods. Christina was born on August 19, 1989 in South Bend, Indiana, USA. Her mother, Mary, was only 18 years old when she gave birth to her. Christina was the first child in the family and later had 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers, forming a large family. From a young age, she dreamed of an ideal married life and having many children. However, during her elementary school years, family problems began to arise, ultimately leading to her father's departure. Christina wanted to avoid the mistakes of her parents and build a complete family, but during her school years, she realized the difficulties and realities of adult life. Christina then met an older man and became pregnant, even though she was very young. She decided to keep the baby, and when she was 16 years old, she gave birth. Unfortunately, the father of the baby was a terrible parent because he abandoned her and the baby. Her mother's life was similar. Her father also abandoned the family. Witnessing her mother's struggles and sacrifices made Christina realize how challenging her own situation would be. Despite facing challenges, Christina was determined to be a good mother, and her relatives believed she succeeded, especially considering her young age. At 17 years old, she met Troy, a 30-year-old man who worked at a store near her home. Although she had always liked older men, the age difference made Troy seem very mature. Despite her mother's warnings about the age gap, they connected and began dating. Their relationship deepened, and they married on November 14, 2007, when Christina turned 18. A year later, she became pregnant again. Tragically, on April 21, 2009, Christina experienced her first heartbreak when her daughter, Lillian, passed away due to health complications. During this difficult time, she sought comfort from Troy, but found it hard to connect with him. He was emotionally distant and held conservative views. Ultimately, Christina had 4 children in total: Haley, Sierra, Kira, and Anthony. Friends and family describe her as friendly and cheerful. In contrast, her husband Troy wanted to control every aspect of their lives. He expected Christina to stay at home and manage household chores, but as a young woman, she was not ready for that. She wanted to enjoy life, spend time with friends, attend parties, and escape from constant control. Troy tried to force her into a routine but failed, which frustrated him and led to many arguments. He often lashed out at her, humiliating her over minor issues. One night, during an unexpected conflict, he assaulted her for the first time. Unable to endure the abuse, she reported him to the police. When officers arrived, Troy tried to blame her for the situation, but his excuses fell flat. She had visible injuries which led to his arrest. Christina decided to break up with Troy, but this choice caused more controversy. After his release from jail, his behavior became erratic. He stalked her and issued threats whenever they crossed paths in public. To protect herself, she sought a restraining order against him. Despite this, he repeatedly violated the order and faced multiple arrests, but he did not face any serious consequences for his actions. In the fall of 2017, Christina was diagnosed with cancer. Fortunately, the disease was caught early enough that surgery could have saved her. However, after the surgery, she had to rest in bed. During this time, Troy began to show renewed interest in Christina. He wants to reconcile and live as a family again, but she makes it clear that she only sees him as the father of her children. She wanted him to bond with the kids, but didn't want to rekindle their relationship. While recovering from surgery at home, Christina received frequent visits from family and friends, especially her mother and her 2 best friends, Gina and Brooke. Brooke often came over with her husband Daniel Lynn. She and Brooke were childhood friends, growing up together and being as close as family. One evening, Christina's mother, Mary, came to look after her daughter and planned to stay overnight. To her surprise, she found Daniel there. Initially, she thought nothing of it. However, as the night went on, his behavior became increasingly odd. First, Brooke wasn't there. Second, Daniel didn't leave even after Mary offered to take care of Christina and told him he could go home. He ended up staying all night, proving that this was more than just a casual visit. The next morning, Mary ran into Brooke, who expressed concern about Daniel's behavior. Mary asked why he visited Christina when she was away and why he stayed overnight. She was surprised and had no answer, as she had no idea what was going on. She was devastated when she discovered that her husband, Daniel, had been having an affair with her best friend Christina for a long time. Feeling betrayed and unhappy, she went straight to confront Christina. She felt deceived not only by her husband, but also by someone she considered a close friend, someone she had grown up with. When Brooke confronted Christina, a heated argument ensued. Christina admitted that for the past 10 years, she and Brooke's husband Daniel had been secretly involved while pretending to be just friends. They had been enjoying their affair without any intention of ending it. This revelation infuriated Brooke. Meanwhile, Christina's ex-husband Troy learned about the situation. He realized that their marriage had been built on betrayal, as Christina had also cheated on him. Seizing the opportunity, he decided to fight for full custody of their children, claiming he was concerned for their well-being due to Christina's irresponsible behavior. However, her family and friends believed that Troy's real purpose in seeking custody was to hurt her as much as possible. Despite this, Daniel's relationships with both Brooke and Christina continued, creating a complicated love triangle. Daniel alternated between living with Brooke and Christina, often choosing one woman while arguing with the other. Both women were aware of this situation but chose to tolerate it, and neither was willing to end the cycle. This led to tensions between them, resulting in constant arguments and even physical fights. In May 2018, Daniel spent time with Christina again. She urged him to leave Brooke for her, but this discussion was starting to frustrate him. Their conversation turned into another argument, which escalated into violence, leaving Christina injured and hospitalized. Despite this incident, she did not end her relationship with Daniel, seemingly holding on to hope for a future with him, even though he was married to her friend Brooke. During this time, Christina was in regular contact with her ex-husband Troy, who was determined to gain full custody of their children. Their relationship seemed to improve, but he remained focused on gaining more custody of the children. She felt relieved to have the chance to take her mind off the complications of her love life and spend quality time with her children. On June 9, 2018, Christina attended a job interview in hopes of finding a job and improving her financial situation. Although she still relied on Troy and her family for support, she understood that this reliance couldn't last forever. It was crucial for her to regain her independence and achieve career success to ensure a stable future for herself and her children. After the interview, Christina called her mother, Mary, to share the good news that she had passed the interview and got the job. While driving, she mentioned that she would call her mother again once she got home. She wanted to discuss plans for a celebration with her mother and sister. The drive would take her about 15 to 20 minutes. Her mother was thrilled and eagerly awaited the call. However, an hour passed, and Christina still hadn't called, which made her mother anxious. She tried to distract herself with work, but she felt uneasy. As this was unlike Christina, Mary decided to call Christina, but she didn't answer. Mary then sent text messages and tried to contact her daughter through various messaging apps, but she did not respond. Throughout the day, she tried to contact her daughter. By evening, she felt compelled to contact the police. Unfortunately, they informed her that not enough time had passed to consider Christina a missing person. Because she was an adult, she had the right to leave without reporting it. The police advised her to wait another day. Mary then went to Christina's house to check, but found no sign of her or the children. It seems she hasn't come home yet, and the kids are with their father Troy. This situation made Mary more worried, but she decided to wait until the next day, hoping that things would become clearer. The following day, Mary still couldn't reach her daughter and decided to contact the police to report her missing. This time, the police took her report seriously without hesitation. The situation was becoming very serious because Christina was a responsible mother with 4 children. She was expected to keep in touch with and care for her children. The strangest thing was that a court hearing was scheduled for June 12/38, where custody between Christina and Troy would be decided. However, she did not appear at the hearing, and Troy had to go to court alone. On that same day, Christina's stepfather received a strange message from her. She mentioned having problems and needing help, asking him to come get her. However, 2 hours later, her stepfather received another message from her, saying she was okay and instructing him not to tell her mother, Mary. At that moment, her relatives were finally convinced that something bad had happened to her. During this time, the police were actively searching for Christina, hoping she would show up in court. However, suspicions grew that she was a victim of a crime, as no traces of her could be found. The police began to investigate the complex details of her life and relationships. From the beginning, her ex-husband Troy was the prime suspect, as they often had conflicts. They were in a serious custody dispute, giving him a strong motive to harm her. Despite this, Troy was one of the few who cooperated with the investigation. Meanwhile, neither Brooke nor Daniel was interested in finding Christina, which made people suspicious of them. Eventually, it was established that Troy was not involved. He had an alibi confirmed by several witnesses at the time of Christina's disappearance. He had been with the children and appeared genuinely worried about Christina's situation. Despite their disagreements, Troy did not want the children to grow up without their mother. He was more focused on gaining full custody because Christina's life was chaotic, and he wanted to protect the children from that instability. The second suspect is Daniel Lynn, Brooke's husband. Daniel owned a house in St. Louis County, Minnesota. Investigators analyzed Christina's phone data and discovered that this house was the last place she had visited. It is worth noting that the house had been abandoned for 5 years, and Daniel rarely maintained it. Detectives then went to investigate the area for any sign of Christina. At first, the house seemed normal, befitting its abandoned state. Despite the house being vacant for years, there was a strong scent of cleaning products wafting in from a slightly open window, suggesting recent use. On the kitchen table, they found gloves commonly used for cleaning. Neighbors reported unusual activity around the house, stating that several cars had been parked there from June 11th to June 15th. Investigators later also looked at Daniel's recent bank transactions. They found that shortly before Christina went missing, he bought a significant amount of cleaning products and protective gear similar to what was found in the house at a local hardware store. They asked to see the video from the surveillance camera. On that day, Daniel was not shopping alone. Brooke was with him, and both appeared tense. The store clerk who assisted them confirmed this. He noticed Daniel trying to contain his anxiety with a distracted look in his eyes, while Brooke looked very uneasy. Shortly after, the detectives noticed a large fire pit on Daniel's land, where they discovered several items that had been partially burned by the fire. Among these were fragments of a mobile phone, a bracelet, a button from a pair of jeans, and several other melted items that had an inscription from an amusement park. This was the same park where Christina had spent time with Troy and the children shortly before she went missing. Troy confirmed that all of these items could have been burned. This coincidence cannot be just a coincidence, however. The information needs to be verified. On July 2, 2018, 24 days after Christina went missing, the police conducted a thorough search of the area around Daniel's house. They searched nearly every inch of the area and then discovered a fresh grave. As they dug deeper, they found Christina's body. After conducting an autopsy, experts confirmed that she had been beaten for an extended period and had suffered severe injuries. However, the cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Subsequently, detectives sought an arrest warrant for 40-year-old Daniel Lynn. However, he was not planning to surrender and went into hiding, leaving no clues about his location. Meanwhile, the police tried to locate Brooke and discovered that she had also disappeared. That evening, an anonymous witness contacted the police and reported that Daniel had gone to a trailer park several hundred miles from his home. The witness also indicated that Daniel had likely harmed Christina, as he had confessed to doing so. When the police arrived at the trailer park, Daniel and Brooke had disappeared again. Local residents confirmed that they had been there and pointed out the trailer they used. Detectives later found a receipt from a gas station a few miles away in a trash bin. CCTV footage showed them entering the store together, holding hands. This clearly indicated that Brooke was not a victim of kidnapping. She had been with Daniel willingly. On July 3, 2018, Brooke suddenly appeared and was immediately arrested and taken to the police station. She reported that Daniel had called her earlier that day, the day Christina went missing. He asked her to bring tools and some items from their home, saying that their family farm was flooded and needed repairs. When Brooke brought the items to him, she found Christina there. Brooke admitted that Christina and Daniel had argued, which led to a fight. She said that she just stood by and watched without trying to intervene. In a fit of rage, he hit Christina so hard that she fell and lost consciousness. He then took Brooke outside and returned to the house with a shovel. Brooke went to the car and waited for him to return. When Daniel finally came back, he appeared out of breath and covered in dirt. Brooke maintains that she had nothing to do with Christina's death, but believes that Daniel killed and buried Christina on their land. However, she could not specify the exact location, claiming she did not witness the events. Brooke mentioned that she had not seen Daniel since that day and was unaware of his current whereabouts. The detectives did not inform her that Christina's body had already been discovered. Instead, they hoped to catch her in a lie or find inconsistencies in her story, but there were very few. After that, they sent her home, but asked her to contact the police if she learned anything new about Christina. However, they began to closely monitor her movements and noticed that she frequently visited a trailer park where her parents owned a small house. Although Brooke had previously claimed she didn't know Daniel's whereabouts, surveillance footage showed them together at a gas station, suggesting they had run away together. It's possible they later separated. The detectives decided to verify her story when she returned to the trailer park. Brooke was already there when they arrived. They entered the trailer and found Daniel inside. Both immediately refused to answer questions and requested a lawyer. There was no resistance, and they were subsequently arrested. Many questions arose regarding Brooke's possible involvement in the murder. While Daniel's DNA was found on Christina's body, this does not necessarily mean he acted alone. His wife, Brooke, may also have played a role in attacking Christina, disposing of the body, and cleaning up the crime scene to the point of leaving no evidence. According to Brooke, Daniel and Christina's relationship was complicated, and he often treated her badly. Despite this, Christina forgave him repeatedly due to her strong feelings for him. She often expressed that she felt like part of his family and was reluctant to end their relationship. Christina believes that once she becomes financially independent, she can work through her issues with Troy and improve her relationship with Daniel. Unfortunately, her hopes never came true, eventually leading to her tragic murder. Daniel and Brooke were questioned. Brooke claimed that Christina had provoked the aggression, as she always did, which made it difficult for Daniel to control himself. However, he refused to cooperate with the investigation. His lawyer argued that the prosecutor's office lacked sufficient evidence to press charges, but this was incorrect. Daniel Lynn was held on a $1 million bail, which he was unable to pay, forcing him to remain in jail. To avoid severe punishment, he agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. He confessed to second-degree murder, which carries a maximum sentence of 40 years. As a result of the plea deal, he received a 16-year prison term. Brooke pleaded guilty to assisting Daniel, which allowed her to avoid a jury trial. Christina's mother and those who cared about her were shocked to learn that Brooke was sentenced to only 1 year in prison. Brooke admitted to witnessing the abuse of her best friend Christina without intervening. However, the prosecutor's office could not find enough evidence to charge her with a crime. After serving her sentence, Brooke continued her relationship with Daniel. Christina's family was outraged. Even her ex-husband Troy criticized the leniency of the sentence, but they were unable to have the court's decision overturned. They had to accept the outcome. Although Christina lost custody of her 4 children, her eldest daughter Haley, who was 15 at the time, was allowed to live with her maternal grandmother, while the other 3 children went to live with their father. In an interview after the trial, Christina's mother expressed her desire for her daughter to be remembered not as a victim of crime or violence, but as a loving mother, daughter, and sister. She tried to persuade the court to reconsider the case and increase the sentence, but her efforts were unsuccessful. The Maria Alejandra La Fuente Casco case. Maria Alejandra La Fuente Casco was a charming young Mexican psychologist. Well known for her love of staying fit and active, she took great care of her petite figure, delighting in her own beauty and charm. With her light, wheat-colored complexion, long black hair, full lips, and deep-set eyes, she was a sight to behold. Maria Alejandra loved spending time at the beach, basking in the sun to maintain her impeccable tan. Following in her father's footsteps, the esteemed psychologist and renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Alberto Eduardo, Maria Alejandra held a deep admiration for her father, which ultimately inspired her to pursue a career in psychology. She specialized in treating adolescents and young adults dealing with depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders. Her practice was located in the Roma Sur neighborhood in Mexico City. As a divorcee and a mother of 2, Maria Alejandra was eager to find love again and create a new home for her family. However, her divorce had not been amicable. In fact, in 2011, she became involved in a shocking incident against her ex-husband. According to his statements, which remain anonymous as per authorities' decision, the incident occurred after their separation. He had gone to visit their children when Maria Alejandra asked him to enter the living room and sit on a strangely plastic-covered sofa. At first, he refused, but she insisted, claiming their daughter had a surprise for him. Reluctantly, he agreed to blindfold himself and take a seat. After several minutes of silence, not hearing any sounds from his daughter or Maria Alejandra, he grew suspicious. Just as he was confirming his suspicions, he felt a severe blow to his head, struck by the fireplace poker. Instantly removing his blindfold, he pleaded with his ex-wife to calm down, but she continued her assault. In a desperate attempt to escape, he realized the door was locked. With her ex-husband now fully at her mercy, Maria Alejandra grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed him in the abdomen and back. Cornered and in severe pain, he tried to wrest the knife from her grasp, only for her to bite his arm. The woman tried to inject him with a substance using a syringe, but he struggled and managed to get her off of him, eventually escaping. The couple's daughter, who had witnessed her parents violently confront each other on numerous occasions, saw everything that happened that traumatic night. In none of the previous instances of violence had the couple sought intervention from authorities. However, this time was different. The man believed that Maria Alejandra had gone too far, so he decided to report her. According to the files, the psychologist was accused by the Homicide Prosecutor's Office of the Mexico City Attorney General's Office of attempted homicide. Maria Alejandra was taken to jail, and the 67th criminal judge issued a pretrial detention order. Later, the charge was reclassified to attempted mitigated homicide. On June 14, 2012, she was sentenced to serve 1 year and 4 months in prison. However, Maria Alejandra and her lawyers quickly mobilized to obtain various benefits. As a result, she was released after obtaining a sentence substitution for the payment of fines, as well as conditional suspension of the sentence. For compensation for material damage, a fine of 18,843 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,009 at the current exchange rate, was imposed, and for moral damages compensation, 31,200 pesos, approximately $1,836. Despite obtaining these advantages, the defense lawyers were dissatisfied with the judicial resolution. They argued that Maria Alejandra had acted in self-defense, claiming that her ex-husband used to beat her. Therefore, they filed an appeal against the sentence, which was reviewed by the magistrates of the 9th Criminal Chamber. Ultimately, these magistrates determined that the woman was not criminally responsible and ordered her full release, lifting the sentence. Upon her release, Maria Alejandra returned to her psychology practice as if nothing had happened. The image she projected ultimately worked in her favor, as she presented herself as an empowered victim who had overcome gender violence. But with a new life came a new victim. Back in her practice, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera Cuellar, a 41-year-old Mexican businessman. The man was the son of Adrian Carrera Fuentes, a former director of the now-defunct Federal Judicial Police, who had had a long and fruitful career in law enforcement, holding chief positions in different institutions. Adrian, Alan's father, established several businesses aimed at supplying the construction sector with materials. He specialized mainly in the sale of tiles and founded a chain of stores in southern Mexico. While his commercial establishments were legitimate, Adrian had mafia connections. Consequently, he was removed from his position to face legal proceedings and was charged due to his direct ties with the Juarez Cartel, a Mexican criminal organization involved in drug trafficking and other illicit activities. This group controlled a significant percentage of drug trafficking from Mexico to the United States. The organization was led by Amado Carrillo, who died in 1997 in a Mexico City hospital after undergoing extensive plastic surgery to change his appearance. Adrian was accused of providing protection to both Carrillo and Juan Garcia, the leader of the Gulf Cartel. Garcia was on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in the 1990s until his arrest in January 1996. He was later extradited to the United States, where he was convicted on 22 counts of money laundering, drug possession, and trafficking. These events are significant due to their direct and indirect impact on Alan's life. Since Adrian was associated with such influential figures in the criminal world, it was anticipated, given the accumulated evidence against him and his own confession, that he would spend at least 20 years in prison. However, by participating in the Witness Protection Program during the investigation of the Juarez Cartel by the Attorney General's Office of Mexico, he was released on July 18, 2000, to dedicate himself entirely to his businesses. Meanwhile, Alan joined the family business, managing the tile stores founded by his influential father. This role not only helped him earn a good income but also left him with a lot of free time. He was married and had a daughter, but in early 2011, he divorced his wife, leaving him devastated, depressed, and struggling with alcoholism. That's when he decided to seek therapy and started attending psychological consultations with Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father. At the same time, his teenage daughter, affected by her parents' breakup, started attending sessions with a psychologist to learn how to cope with the consequences of their separation and to manage this traumatic process. Her father's therapist recommended this, and she ended up discussing her issues with Maria Alejandra. Alan accompanied his daughter to the clinic, and after the third session, Maria Alejandra asked the girl to introduce her to her father, claiming professional reasons. She said she wanted to talk to him to make better progress in therapy. However, this was just an excuse, as Maria Alejandra wanted to get to know Alan on a personal level. It didn't take long for them to start a romantic relationship. When the teenager found out, she was furious and stopped attending the sessions, but not before confronting Maria Alejandra about her misconduct. Maria Alejandra, assertive and intimidating, threatened to kill the young girl if she interfered with the new relationship. After a few weeks, what started as casual dates and romantic encounters turned into a formal marriage proposal from Alan. He decided to start a new life with Maria Alejandra, completely unaware of the reasons behind her separation from her ex-husband. One weekend in April 2014, Alan went to visit his family and introduced Maria Alejandra as his soon-to-be wife. They informed everyone that they would be getting married within a week, and she even mentioned that she might be pregnant. The wedding took place the following Monday, but no members of the Carrera family attended. They weren't invited under the premise that the ceremony would be very intimate. Only Maria Alejandra's father, his wife, and their children attended. Maria Alejandra, seemingly perfect, soon revealed her true nature. After the wedding, things started to change drastically. The newlyweds' relationship began to turn tumultuous, though there are not many details about what transpired between them, as Alan was a very reserved man. It is known that violence escalated in their interactions. Alan's family disapproved of his relationship with Maria Alejandra, noticing that he became more prone to anger and seemed increasingly worried. For this reason, all of Alan's loved ones preferred to keep their distance from his wife. At some point, Maria Alejandra, who had no regard for privacy, went through Alan's phone and allegedly found compromising messages that suggested he was involved with another woman. She claimed this was the final straw, stating that she was tired of enduring constant mistreatment from Alan and was unwilling to tolerate his infidelity as well. Convinced that trying to save the relationship was futile, she did not want to try therapy. She also didn't consider legally ending the relationship through a divorce, as they both had done with their previous marriages. To her, there was only one way to solve the problem: eliminate her husband. From that point on, she coldly calculated every step to execute her plan perfectly. Meanwhile, Alan seemed unaware of the extent of the conflict with Maria Alejandra and maintained his work routines and contact with his family. Despite the family's differences with his new wife, Alan remained close to his loved ones, communicating daily through WhatsApp. They respected his decisions, and although they found the marriage to be somewhat rushed, they continued to support him. Surprisingly, the family contact dynamic changed abruptly. On October 31st, 2014, Alan exchanged messages with his family for the last time. Overnight, everyone lost contact with him. He didn't show up at work, at his parents' house, or at his daughter's house. Additionally, while he responded to text messages, they seemed to be written strangely. He didn't answer phone calls or send voice messages. On November 5th, 2014, Maria Alejandra executed her plan with premeditation and cold blood. She waited for her husband to return home from work and gave him a glass containing a drink laced with a psychoactive drug used to treat depression and other mood disorders. The drug has sedative effects due to its composition, and it's a prescription medication that causes drowsiness and impairs movement. Once she was sure he was completely sedated, Maria Alejandra showed no mercy. She stabbed Alan in the abdomen with a sharp kitchen tool while he was defenseless, waiting for him to take his last breath. The next step was to dispose of the body. She placed it on the bedroom floor and used an electric saw to dismember his body into pieces that she could handle and store in plastic garbage bags. To facilitate transportation, she put the bags into a red suitcase. The body parts that could help identify him were placed in another bag and stored in her kitchen freezer. Once everything was in order, around 12:45 a.m., she called the security guards of the private housing estate where she lived. She asked for help to load the suitcase into her van, as recorded in the security logbook of that day. The condominium security personnel found her extremely nervous and desperate, glancing around in all directions. They asked her what was in the suitcase, and she replied that it was her father's surgical equipment and that she needed to transport it to the hospital immediately because she was very sick and he was going to perform emergency surgery on her. During the time she was away from her residence, she scattered the bags containing the body parts in 2 different parts of the city. Upon returning home, she changed the locks on the doors and informed the residential security guard that she was going on a trip with her husband. On November 6, 2014, Mexico City police found a human torso without upper limbs. In the afternoon, they had found other human remains, including arms and legs without hands or feet, in black plastic bags. The distance between the first and second discovery sites was considerable, explaining why Maria Alejandra took so long to return to the condominium that early morning. The remains were transferred to the Institute of Forensic Sciences, where anthropologist specialists determined that they belonged to a single person, but they were unable to identify the individual at that time. To distract Alan's relatives and prevent them from notifying the police, Maria Alejandra used her husband's mobile phone to send greetings and respond to all received messages. She temporarily succeeded in ensuring that no one suspected his tragic end, buying herself time to organize a plan to appear guilt-free, just as she had done when she attacked her first husband. Alan's siblings and daughter received WhatsApp messages in which he supposedly commented that he regretted getting married and announced that he had recently started a relationship with another woman. Other contradictory messages stated that he liked being alone, and some said he was traveling. At the same time, Alberto, Maria Alejandra's father, began calling Alan's father to inquire if they knew the whereabouts of his daughter, whom he had been searching for days without any news. Later, he called Alan's parents again to inform them that he had found Maria Alejandra and that she was admitted to the National Institute of Psychiatry, seeking treatment for depression caused by Alan's supposed infidelity. He also mentioned that she had become paranoid, thinking that the police were after her, which was another reason for her hospitalization. In the midst of this web of deception, months passed. But when December came with its special connotation of family unity, Alan's relatives decided to go to his house to see him. Once again, Maria Alejandra was a step ahead. She notified them that they would not be at the location, as they had decided to take a vacation. This story did not make sense to them at all, especially after Alberto's call confirming that she was in the city and undergoing psychiatric treatment. So when the alarmed family went to the police and filed a missing person report for Alan, it only took a few days for the authorities to notice that the report matched the recently found remains. The prosecutors cross-referenced information with staff from the Center for Missing and Absent Persons. These conversations helped them progress in achieving a full identification of the victim. They compared the characteristics of the human remains with the reports of missing persons with similar physical traits. Finally, Alan's body was identified by his relatives. The officers then decided to inspect the couple's house, and upon arrival, they found Maria Alejandra. The detectives immediately took her to the police station and secured a search warrant. Once obtained, they searched the house for evidence and finally found Alan's head, feet, and hands, as well as an electric saw. The investigators found blood traces in one of the rooms and in the bathroom using luminal tests. They also noticed that the surface of the mattress and a piece of the carpet had been cut out to erase evidence of fluids. It was later determined that Maria Alejandra had used these items to support Alan's body parts. Initially, she was questioned as a witness but fell into constant and obvious contradictions, becoming the main person of interest in the case. The investigation soon determined that she was the one sending messages from her husband's cell phone to make his family believe he was alive and not report his disappearance. Maria Alejandra claimed she knew nothing about Alan, that she had not seen him for several days, and that they barely communicated through text messages. Taking advantage of her background as a psychologist and trying to prove her innocence, she showed an admission form to a psychiatric clinic dated during the days when her husband disappeared. Initially, Maria Alejandra denied all responsibility, but Alan's body spoke for itself, and the forensic experts were able to perfectly reconstruct the events. From their analysis, the experts noted in the autopsy protocol that a wound was visible on the torso, caused by a sharp instrument that had penetrated the abdomen and was classified as lethal. With all the evidence that the authorities gathered at the couple's house, as well as at the sites where they found his remains, the investigators were able to establish Maria Alejandra's connection to her husband's cruel death. The detectives had testimonies placing her at the scene at the time of the events, and this was supported by the building security log, which detailed the specific time she left and entered, plus the issue of the heavy suitcase that they helped her load into her vehicle. In addition, statements from Alan's daughter and sister revealed that the psychologist had threatened the young girl with taking her life if she opposed the relationship with her father. Although Maria Alejandra attempted to evade responsibility by admitting herself to a psychiatric center, forensic studies confirmed that she did not suffer from any mental illness. Finally cornered by the evidence, Maria Alejandra confessed to the fatal assault against her husband and admitted that she took him by surprise. However, she justified her actions by stating she was tired of the domestic violence she was experiencing. On December 10, 2014, the court issued a formal prison order for Maria Alejandra for the crime of homicide. From that moment on, information began to emerge that could implicate the woman in other fatal violent events. For instance, it was said that Maria Alejandra might have committed another serious crime against people in 2012. All this leads to suspicions that the accused might have had help from her father, who would be an accomplice in covering for her and diverting public opinion. Over the years, he allegedly stripped the man of some of his assets, according to Mexican media. Thus, there are suspicions that, in reality, the La Fuente father and daughter were highly dangerous criminals. However, justice did not establish any decisive line of investigation in this regard. After an 8-year wait, on Monday, September 5, 2022, the General Prosecutor's Office of the Capital announced the sentence. For the crimes of qualified homicide and disrespect to corpses or human remains, Maria Alejandra La Fuente Casco was sentenced to 46 years and 6 months in prison, an unprecedented punishment in modern Mexican justice. After the firm conviction, she has no right to review the sentence or to alternative measures that relieve the prison sentence. She was also ordered to pay for the damage and funeral costs, and she lost her political rights. Maria Alejandra La Fuente was a calculating woman who seems to have taken advantage of her father's influence and protection to act freely and proceed against the men who, in some way, tried to save her from punishment for the assault she committed against her first husband, using an argument that portrayed her as a mistreated lady, probably making use of her great manipulation skills. Then, just 3 years later, she acted again, this time against her second husband. Acting with incredible cold blood, she planned the bloody end and even feigned insanity to once again avoid being held responsible for her actions. But this time, she had gone too far. Nothing could save her from being harshly sentenced by justice. Dale Dwayne Williams was born July 15, 1956. He would later marry Diana, and the couple lived in the small town of Nucla, Colorado, with their 2 daughters. He owned the Pro Body Shop in Nucla and is described as well-liked and very helpful to anyone that needed it. He was family-oriented, a great father, and a very hard worker. On May 27, 1999, he received a phone call while at work, and his friend Tom overheard part of the conversation and said the way he was talking, he believed he was talking to a female. When he hung up the phone, he said he was going to help a stranded motorist in Bedrock, which is about a 20 to 30-minute drive from the shop. However, he never mentioned exactly who he was going to help. His friends said that nothing else seemed out of the ordinary, and Dale said he would be back soon. This was strange because, although he owned the body repair shop, he did not usually get calls regarding leaving work to help anyone with car problems. On the way there, he stopped by a local business in town to let a customer know when her vehicle would be ready. While he was there, he mentioned that he was en route to assist a stranded motorist. This was the last time Dale was ever seen. It wasn't unusual for Dale to work late into the night or even early morning hours. But when he didn't come home by later in the morning, his wife became worried and drove to her mother-in-law's house, and the two went looking for him. They first stopped by the shop, but Dale was nowhere to be found. Later that day, after no luck finding him, she reported him missing. Dale drove a white 1994 Ford pickup truck, which had the words Pro Body Shop stenciled on the sides. Many weeks would go by with no signs of Dale, despite a large search party. Several weeks after he disappeared, a family was fishing in a local swimming hole when one of the boys' hooks got caught on something. He then swam out to get it and discovered that it was hooked on a truck. He pulled the dash cover through the window, and it was labeled Pro Body Shop. The truck was in over 10 feet of water and was turned to the on position, and the window was halfway down. It was removed and determined to be Dale's truck, but there were no signs of Dale. It was believed that someone most likely purposefully steered the truck into the water, which is why the window was halfway down and the truck in gear. The swimming hole is located between the San Miguel River and the Dolores River, and it could only be known to the locals because it is in such a secluded area. Some of his tools were found on the side of the road in the opposite direction from where his truck was found. Investigators believe the suspect did this to throw off the investigation. A witness had reported seeing an individual matching Dale's description at approximately 6 p.m. on the day he disappeared at a market. Strangely, a neighbor claimed that Dale's truck was parked outside the Pro Body Shop about a couple of hours after he left to assist the caller. However, investigators have never been able to confirm either sighting. There were several strange occurrences prior to Dale's disappearance. One of Dale's friends was being abusive to his wife, and she confided in Dale and his wife Diana. The couple then secretly helped her move out of state. When the former friend inquired about where his wife was, Dale refused to tell him, and he became very angered. One of Dale's daughters worked at a local fast food restaurant, and on the day of his disappearance, an unidentified man walked into the restaurant asking for his daughter. She happened to be off work that day, so the man walked back outside and spoke on a payphone for about 15 minutes. Torn photographs of Dale and the former friend's family were found outside the Pro Body Shop shortly after his disappearance, along with scattered .22 caliber bullets. Also, Dale's wife ran a local video store in town and would find her husband's .22 caliber revolver inside a nighttime drop box several weeks later. Authorities believe that someone had broken into Dale's business and stolen the photos and the gun. Investigators questioned the couple's former friend, but he denied any involvement in the burglaries. He had an alibi around the time Dale disappeared, and investigators ruled him out as a suspect after passing a polygraph test. Strangely, missing poster flyers were being removed by someone on a regular basis. His family decided to place a surveillance camera in the post office where the posters were repeatedly being removed. It was discovered that the person removing his missing poster signs was the former friend of Dale's who was angry at him. When questioned, he admitted to removing the signs but was not charged with any crime. As of today, no one has been arrested for Dale's disappearance, and sadly, he remains missing, and the case remains unsolved. A 29-year-old mother of two named Mary Mathis Davis vanished without a trace in Lexington on May 30, 1987. The news of her disappearance devastated her family and friends. The following day, her body was discovered behind a nearby supermarket, and the discovery shocked the neighborhood. Despite the police department's best efforts, the case remained unsolved for more than 30 years before a breakthrough in 2023. This case takes us to the city of Lexington in North Carolina. The city of Lexington has a rich and diverse cultural heritage, and its well-known barbecue has earned it the title Barbecue Capital of the World. Beyond its delectable cuisine, Lexington has a charming downtown populated with interesting stores and eateries that reflect the city's warm and welcoming nature. Popular with tourists, the city's historic uptown Lexington neighborhood has beautifully preserved early 19th century buildings. On February 12, 1958, Mary Mathis Davis was born in Lexington, although little is known about her early years. She had a sister named Lisa Hinkle, whom she grew up with. Mary and Lisa had a tight-knit bond in such a way that nothing could separate them. Lisa described her sister as a lovely, compassionate person who never failed to brighten up a room with her contagious smile. Mary was also said to have had a talent for putting people at ease. When the two came of age, Mary met a man named Richard Davis. A spark began to develop between them as they got to know one another, and before they knew it, they were engulfed in a passionate relationship. As their relationship progressed, Richard Davis knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with Mary. Mary was overcome with joy when he one day suddenly asked her to be his wife. Without hesitating, she said yes to his proposal. Following the proposal, Mary and Richard started to eagerly make plans for their future as a couple. They talked for hours on end about what their future held, sharing their goals and aspirations for the life they were about to begin. The big day quickly approached, and the couple exchanged vows in a charming and private ceremony. Following the wedding, Mary and Richard began a new chapter in their lives and eagerly anticipated the journey that lay ahead. The years passed quickly, and Mary and Richard soon had two lovely children. The first child was a boy, and the second, Tracy, was a girl. Mary's heart brimmed with love, and she cherished every second she had with her kids. Later on, she accepted a position at Lexington's Lanier's Ace hardware store to support her expanding family. Mary didn't mind the fact that the work wasn't the most glamorous. She was appreciative of the chance to earn a consistent income. Even though Mary didn't make much money, it was still enough to pay the bills and put food on the table. Mary was determined to give her family the best life she could despite the difficulties that came with balancing the demands of motherhood and working a job. Life went on at a good pace as the days turned into weeks, then weeks into months. Mary's family was doing well, and she was happy inside. But tragedy was lurking around the corner, ready to strike when least expected. On May 30th, 1987, Mary left her house as usual to go to work. Though it seemed like any other Saturday, she had no idea that it would be her last day on Earth. When Mary got to work, she smiled and said hello to her colleagues before starting her day. She eagerly got started on her tasks. But as the hours passed, she noticed that she was growing hungry and restless. By noon, her stomach was grumbling, and she painstakingly waited for lunchtime. When the time finally came, she was relieved to have the opportunity to leave the four walls of her workplace. She anticipated treating herself to a nice meal, She checked her purse to see if she had enough cash to get herself lunch. And when she was certain she did, she left her store and went to a nearby restaurant. No one would ever again see Mary alive after this. She didn't go back to work. Once her lunch break was over, her absence became more obvious with each second that went by. Her co-workers couldn't help but wonder what was taking her so long. Their confusion turned into worry as the minutes felt like hours. They knew they needed to find her quickly because there were no indications of her return. One of them offered without hesitation to look for her at the eatery where she went to have lunch. The co-worker hurried to the eatery as her heart raced, but Mary was not there. The staff at the restaurant was of no assistance either, and the situation was getting worse. When the co-worker went back to the hardware store, she reported that she could not find Mary at the eatery. As soon as they heard this, the hardware store employees started to feel afraid and realized they needed to act more decisively. They picked up the phone and dialed the emergency number without delaying further. After providing details of what had happened, the police arrived almost immediately. The co-workers also called Mary's husband and parents to inform them of what was happening. Police started looking for Mary right away that day, but at first, they found nothing. She was completely out of sight. As word of her disappearance spread, a sense of fear and uncertainty overcame the neighborhood. On the other hand, Mary's family was left to struggle through the pain of not knowing where she was or what had happened to her. But they hoped and prayed that their dear Mary would be found alive and well. That night, Richard had a hard time falling asleep. His thoughts kept him up at night. He had a gut feeling that a serious problem had befallen his family. He realized that Mary's disappearance was not a straightforward case of getting lost in the city because it did not make sense to him. His mind wandered to their kids and how he would look them in the face the following day. Unaware of the potential danger to their mother, the innocent kids had been asking Richard about their mother. The idea of breaking the news to them that she might never return was too painful for Richard to bear. But he was aware that he needed to be there for his kids all the way. The next morning, as the sun rose, the search for Mary persisted. But it seemed like all the efforts were in vain. Mary's family and the police were anxiously searching for any information about her sudden disappearance. As the day wore on, the police abruptly received a call reporting the discovery of a dead body behind the building of a nearby supermarket called Winn-Dixie. After the call, a small group of police officers rushed to the scene right away. After seeing a small crowd forming around the body's discovery, the police officers moved in to quickly secure the area. The body had clearly been there for some time, as they could see. It was already starting to emit a slight odor of decay. They were able to recognize the body as belonging to Mary Mathis Davis after closer examination. The officers' faces showed shock and disbelief, but they also knew they needed to get to the root of the investigation. There was no immediate indication of the cause of death, so the police started looking around right away for any possible clues. They also questioned the supermarket staff, but none of them appeared to be particularly knowledgeable about what had happened to the victim. The body was then removed for an autopsy after that. One of the policemen showed up at Mary's family's house the day her body was discovered. As the atmosphere was tense, the officer broke the heartbreaking news to her family. He offered his condolences and shared what little information they had about Mary's case. The news was indeed tragic, as Mary's family was left broken and inconsolable. After a few days, Mary's autopsy results came out, and it was discovered that she was strangled to death. It was also found that she had been sexually assaulted. As a result, Mary's death was classified as a homicide. The authorities started investigating Mary's death as her family was left to mourn and stay strong. The investigators were determined to find the answers to the many unanswered questions they had. Investigators had DNA samples that had been gathered from the crime scene as pieces of evidence, though there wasn't much that could be done with this due to the lack of advanced DNA technology at the time. Regardless of the shortcomings, detectives diligently pursued every lead and tip that came their way, working day and night. At one point, they appealed to the general public for assistance, hoping that someone would come forward with information that would help solve the mystery behind the case. But all efforts proved futile. The detectives felt defeated because it appeared as though the murderer had vanished from the face of the earth. As the days dragged on, becoming weeks and then months, the murderer seemed to have eluded capture. However, Mary's family never lost hope and held on to the belief that justice would eventually be served no matter how long it took. They made an effort to move on with their lives, but the scars from their loss never completely healed. Nearly 25 years after Mary's murder, Lisa, her sister, spoke to the media about the tragedy and pain that she and her family members had to go through when Mary was snatched from them. She spoke candidly to the press about the pain they had experienced and how difficult life had been without her cherished sister by her side. The family had never given up hope that they would one day find the closure they so desperately sought. As Lisa reflected on the happy times they spent together with Mary, despite the pain and loss, she revealed that the family was not interested in exacting revenge and that she was prepared to offer Mary's killer forgiveness. A new group of detectives working on Mary's murder case in 2022 made the decision to examine the evidence at hand. They knew about the developments in DNA technology and were confident that, compared to 1987, they now stood a better chance of cracking the case. After that, the detectives delivered some tangible evidence to the North Carolina State Crime Lab. The North Carolina Bureau of Investigation was contacted to look into the case based on the encouraging results of the analysis of the evidence. From that point on, things accelerated. The Texas-based private forensic genealogy laboratory called Othram was contacted by the State Bureau of Investigation. A DNA piece of evidence was then sent to Othram, where scientists were able to create a genealogical profile for potential suspects. The unidentified male suspect was finally identified after months of diligent work. Russell Grant Woods was the name given as the murderer of Mary Mathis Davis. The detectives felt relieved after making the discovery because they were certain that the case had been solved. There was a problem, though. There was no way to bring the murderer to justice because, according to a background check, he had passed away in 2013 at the age of 58. Russell Grant Woods had previously been named as a suspect in the case, but detectives were forced to focus their attention elsewhere at the time due to a lack of sufficient evidence. Not only that, but it was also learned that Mary and Russell Grant Woods had known each other before her death, although it is unclear what kind of relationship they had. If Russell Grant Woods had still been alive, the state would have moved forward with indictments and accused him of first-degree rape, kidnapping, and murder. Mary's surviving family learned of the case's breakthrough on February 3, 2023. They thanked the detectives for their commitment to the investigation. "We prayed that one day we would find the person who violently murdered our beloved Mary. We now have some answers. Although that won't bring Mary back, it does give us a sense of closure," Lori Martin, Mary's niece, told the press. On February 12, 2023, Mary's family held a memorial celebration at Forest Hill Memorial Park in Mary's honor. If she was still alive, that day would have marked her 65th birthday. Mary was a light in this world, and we were blessed to have her as long as we did. She was a loving mother, wife, sister, and friend. "We know she is resting easily in the arms of our Lord and Savior," Lori Martin said. "There are still many questions that we will never have the answers to. Even though the mystery surrounding Mary's death has been solved and the murderer has been found, what sort of connection do you think Mary and Russell had? Post your ideas in the comments section to share with us." The case of Cassandra Cantrell. Cassandra and Robert were twins. As children, Cassandra and Robert liked to tell each other scary stories in a room with the lights off. Robert was a talented storyteller. Cassandra always found Robert's stories interesting. In every story, Robert played a small but brave man. In addition, Cassandra and Robert also watched the animated series Scooby-Doo together. Although their mother, Mary Smith, did not share Cassandra's passion to instill in her children a love of reading, she bought them many books about scary stories. Loving horror stories was the passion of the two siblings. They even collected figurines of villains and, as adults, seriously considered opening a horror-themed bookstore. Not long after, Cassandra's interest in horror movies brought her to the studio in 2004. She got a cameo role in a scary movie that, although it did not become popular, still made Robert envious of Cassandra. Robert began asking Cassandra to make him a deal. Robert asked Cassandra to give him a role in the movie she was filming. Cassandra readily agreed. Robert was happy, but he couldn't play even a supporting role in a soap opera. The head of the cast in that movie was Colin Dudley, who had a crush on Cassandra since her first days in the movie. At the company Halloween party, Cassandra dressed as Velma from Scooby-Doo and Colin dressed as Alex from A Clockwork Orange. During the party, Colin walked around with a glass of milk all evening, glaring at everyone just like his character did in the movie, and he also said a lot of quotes from the book. Finally, he stopped in front of Cassandra and said that her beauty made Colin want to destroy it. Cassandra thought it was a compliment, and they quickly started dating. But their relationship didn't last long, only a few months. Colin found another actress named Rebecca and began dating her, after which Colin and Rebecca began living together. One day, on August 25, 2020, Cassandra Connell suddenly disappeared. When her mother, Mary Smith, tried to contact her. She did not answer the phone. Mary went to report the incident to the police, and a search was quickly launched. After several days of searching, police found her car under the bridge. Also, the bad news was that the car was unlocked and the keys were still inside. There was no reason for Cassandra to appear here. This place was considered a homeless shelter, where violence often occurred. Officers had to go through the neighborhood questioning many homeless people, but none of them had ever seen Cassandra, and none of them knew when the car appeared here. The detective participating in the search for Cassandra requested to locate Cassandra's cell phone. The signal showed the phone was in the water closest to the bridge, which meant detectives wouldn't be able to recover it and couldn't get the information they needed. To search more closely, a team of divers was about to search the coastal area for Cassandra. Before starting, they stood on the shore, picked up rocks, and threw them into the water to gauge the distance they could throw. Cassandra's mother mentioned that Cassandra's best phone case had rhinestones, making it easy to spot. The phone was soon found, but Cassandra's body was not. Mary expressed her grief, saying she had looked forward to being a grandmother soon and hadn't even had time to set up a crib for her expected grandchild, which was still in its box in the garage. She wondered what to do with it now, unknowingly providing important information for the investigation. According to statistics, many crimes against pregnant women are committed by their partners. However, Mary Smith did not know who Cassandra's boyfriend was. Cassandra was not married and didn't seem to be in a relationship, yet she was pregnant. Mary had no information about him, despite knowing that Cassandra often spoke to someone on the phone. However, the phone number was not saved in Cassandra's phone book, and Mary couldn't recall the number. It's common for girls to confide in at least one friend about their relationships, especially when it comes to something as significant as pregnancy. The police found such a friend who revealed that Cassandra had reconnected with her ex-boyfriend, Colin Dudley. They had a brief relationship in 2004, but it was surprising that they rekindled their romance 15 years after breaking up. When Cassandra discovered she had been pregnant, she had hesitated to inform Colin. She had recalled an earlier conversation where he had expressed his disdain for having children, even expressing relief that his wife Rebecca had been infertile. Fearing a child would disrupt her relationship with Colin, Cassandra had kept her secret hidden. However, as her pregnancy had progressed, it had become more and more difficult to hide underneath the oversized clothes. To avoid arousing suspicion, Cassandra had stopped seeing Colin. Even though she had known she couldn't keep the truth hidden forever, Cassandra decided it had been best to be honest with Colin. So she had told him over the phone that she had been pregnant with his child. Colin had been silent for a moment before replying that he had been happy about the news. Although his tone had seemed a bit off, Cassandra had believed he had truly felt happy. A detective visited Colin's house and knocked on the door. However, the person who had opened the door had been Rebecca, a detective who introduced herself as Colin's old friend and had asked to meet Colin. Without hesitation, Colin had stepped out from behind Rebecca, closed the door behind him, and walked out of the house with the detective. It had seemed like Colin had been expecting this conversation, even though the detective had yet to formally introduce himself. Colin told the detective that he appreciated the detectives for not revealing any information in front of Rebecca. Colin mentioned that he had heard about Cassandra's disappearance and found it strange and said that he didn't know where she had gone. He explained that Cassandra had told him about a big argument with her brother, Robert. Colin had advised Cassandra to reconcile with Robert, but was unsure whether she would take his advice. The detective already knew about the fight between Cassandra and Robert, as Colin had explained to the detective that it had been just a small family misunderstanding, even though Robert had been extremely upset about it. On the day she disappeared, Cassandra had called Colin and said she wanted to talk, but he had refused because of his ego. Now, Colin blamed himself for her disappearance, believing that if he had met her that day, she might not have disappeared. Colin admitted to the detective that he had not been the nicest person, that he had been secretly dating Cassandra behind Rebecca's back for a long time, and expressed his belief that he would probably be punished for it in the other world. Colin also shared that when his father had passed away in 2014, he had a deep hatred for Rebecca. Rebecca often clashed with her father Colin, accusing him of not understanding her. However, sometimes it turned out that it was actually Rebecca who didn't understand her father. After Colin's father had passed away, Colin had wanted to fulfill one of his wishes. His father had been right about some things, and Colin decided to rekindle his relationship with Cassandra. This meant Colin had to end things with Rebecca. Therefore, for 5 years, Colin had lived a double life, which was extremely difficult. Colin constantly made excuses to come home late, telling Rebecca about fake business trips. Colin even bought a fishing rod even though he didn't like fishing. Colin would tell Rebecca that he was going to the lake when in reality he was visiting Cassandra. To make his lie more believable, he bought fish from the supermarket and Rebecca would cook it despite the fact that the smell of fish made him sick. Things took a surprising turn when Colin discovered that Cassandra was pregnant. Colin did not know who the father was, but Cassandra had confided in a close friend that it was Colin. Colin found this hard to believe. She wanted to have a family of her own with Colin, but this was something Colin could not provide for her. Colin assumed she had found someone else, and he assumed that was why Cassandra didn't want to see him anymore. The detective asked Colin when was the last time he had seen her. Colin honestly replied that he didn't remember, but it was probably about 3 or 4 months ago. Colin said that he had run into Cassandra at the mall, but only briefly because Rebecca was trying on clothes, and he had gotten tired of waiting, so he walked to the coffee shop. Colin asked the police officer one last time if they had any chance of finding Cassandra alive. The detective replied that they were doing everything they could and asked Colin to believe him. This was not the last time Colin saw the detective. Although Cassandra's phone was unusable, police had obtained her call records. It turned out that the person Cassandra had been calling frequently was Colin Dudley. Cassandra had called him often, even on the day she went missing. Police also received CCTV footage from the railway station near where Cassandra's abandoned car was found. The video showed a suspicious man standing out among passengers on the platform. He was wearing a long coat, gloves, and a scarf covering his face. A wide-brimmed hat obscured his eyes, making it impossible for police to see his face clearly. However, the detective noted that the man's gait reminded him of Colin Dudley. The hat was similar to the one Colin had worn at the party playing a character in the movie A Clockwork Orange. After tracking the suspect via CCTV, detectives observed him briefly entering a coffee shop, only to leave a few minutes later and head towards the parking lot. There, he got into his car and drove away. Even though his face was obscured the entire time, detectives were still able to write down the license plate number. A search warrant was then issued and a unit was dispatched to Colin Dudley's residence. During the search of Colin's home, detectives hoped that Cassandra was still alive. At first, there was no evidence of a murder at Colin's house. However, in the wardrobe they find the hat that Colin had tried to hide. They then found a basement in his house. When the police went to the basement, they did not find Cassandra there and there was no evidence of a crime. However, the dog detected the smell of blood, became agitated and barked continuously. Colin insisted he did nothing illegal, claiming that the police had no evidence and no other suspects, so they were trying to frame him and he claimed to be an innocent man. In search of more information, detectives interviewed Rebecca, who was shocked by the surprise search, the allegations against her husband, and the fact that she had been deceived for years. She said many things about Colin and her feelings, but when the detective asked if her husband was capable of murder, she thought for a long time and then answered no. The evidence against Colin was not enough to send him to prison, which angered Robert and Mary Smith. Later, Colin was called in again for questioning. This time, Colin claimed that he had an alibi to counter the charges against him. He said that at 6:30 a.m. on August 25th, he went to a hardware store and bought household cleaning chemicals and trash bags. The store's cameras confirmed this, but the purchase of large trash bags raised suspicions. In addition, Colin received a text message from Cassandra saying that Cassandra was coming to his house. Colin immediately deleted the message, but it was still stored in the mobile carrier's memory. The police took it from calls and text messages. According to cell phone signals, Colin and Cassandra had not left the house for several hours that morning. Colin turned off his phone but left Cassandra's phone on, possibly accidentally. As a result, police were able to track his movements, including where he was seen on the station's CCTV cameras. Police suspect Colin may have used the cafe to clean up after the murder and wash up in the toilet. Colin drove to where he had discarded Cassandra's phone, which was the last location of Cassandra's cell phone signal. The police need to find Cassandra's body and seize the GPS tracking device on Colin's car to accurately track his route. This device provided new evidence in the case. Following Colin's trail the previous day, the police discovered a large trash can tied with a rope in a ravine in the forest. The ground around the bag was covered in blood, and it was clear to see what was inside. The case happened a month ago, so identifying the body was difficult. However, police were able to identify Cassandra's body thanks to a tattoo described in the search notes. Colin was arrested the same day and charged with murder. Forensic examination revealed that Cassandra's death was caused by a fractured skull due to blunt force trauma. During the trial, the police presented Colin Dudley's motive for committing the crime. However, due to a lack of witnesses and physical evidence, including the murder weapon, it was impossible to convince the jury that Colin was guilty. To resolve the case, the court offered Colin a plea deal stating that if he pleaded guilty, he would receive a reduced sentence. Colin accepted the deal and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Cassandra's mother and brother were deeply saddened by the outcome, as they still grappled with feelings of guilt for not having met Cassandra before her death. They are especially worried about the fact that Colin may one day be released from prison, free to live the rest of his life regardless of the crimes he has committed against their family. The quiet, mundane life sometimes lie the most extraordinary and harrowing stories. The name of Velma Barfield forever changed the narrative of crime and punishment in the United States. Her life story reads like a tragedy that challenges our perception of evil. Known to many as the Death Row Grandma, she became the first woman executed by lethal injection in the United States, the first woman to be executed after the death penalty's reinstatement in 1976, and also the first woman executed since 1962. But how did a wife, mother, and grandmother, once cherished and loved by those who knew her, transform into one of the most notorious figures in criminal history? Born in a time of economic despair, in the shadow of the Great Depression, Velma Margie Barfield came into the world on October 29, 1932, in Eastover, North Carolina, but was raised near Fayetteville. The second of 9 children, she witnessed a constant battle against poverty from the early age. In rural North Carolina, where life was governed by the rising and setting of the sun, Velma's family toiled on their small tobacco and cotton farm. Velma's father, Murphy Bullard, was a man worn down by the hardships of farm life. His temper was as volatile as the weather that dictated their fortunes. Velma claimed he was physically and sexually abusive to her and her sisters. However, other relatives disputed this. Velma's mother, Lily Bullard, bore the brunt of her husband's frustrations. In their world, love was a luxury they could hardly afford, leaving Velma and her siblings to navigate a childhood marked by emotional absence and the ever-present threat of violence. At a young age, Velma observed the financial differences between herself and her peers. That's when her first criminal activity started. She initially took small amounts of cash from her father to buy little things that she saw her classmates enjoying. Her petty thefts escalated to taking $80 from an elderly neighbor. When her father discovered that, he beat her severely, and Velma stopped stealing for the remainder of her childhood. Raised in a Christian household, young Velma found solace in the pages of her Bible, clinging to faith in the turmoil of her home life. This early introduction to religion was a constant amidst chaos. Yet, as she transitioned to adolescence, the psychological scars left by her upbringing would shape the woman she would later become. The world around was convulsed by World War II. The war, though distant, exacerbated the hardships faced by her family and deepened the fractures within. Velma, like many of her generation, was forced to grow up quickly. Her dreams and aspirations were often overshadowed by depressing needs of survival and duty to family. Yet it was during this time that her resilience and tenacity began to shine through, qualities that would define her in both commendable and tragic ways. As Velma stepped into early adulthood, her desire for a life beyond the confines of her home grew stronger. She dreamed of escape. At the age of 17, she dropped out of school. The search for love and stability led Velma into the arms of Thomas Burke, a union that promised freedom, but instead brought new hardships. By 19, she had 2 children, a son, Ron, and a daughter, Kim. The family lived happily in Parkton, North Carolina for over 15 years. Velma's life with Thomas seemed a hard-earned escape from the poverty and violence of her childhood. Everything changed in 1965 when Thomas got into a serious car crash and suffered head injuries. To cope with the intense pain and headaches caused by his injuries, he became a heavy drinker and drug user. His struggle with alcohol mirrored the demons of Velma's father, reigniting the traumas of her past. The cycle of abuse and neglect she vowed never to repeat began to encroach upon her own family. It was during these turbulent years that Velma's resilience was put to the ultimate test. The pressures of an unhappy marriage, the responsibilities of motherhood, and the patterns of her past weighed heavily on her soul. Velma started a job at a textile factory, but soon had to quit due to health problems. She underwent an urgent hysterectomy, which left her feeling insecure about her femininity. After the surgery, she suffered from debilitating back pain and turned to prescription drugs. What began as a means to cope soon spiraled into addiction that eroded her judgment and set the stage for the tragedies to come. Her journey was not a plunge, but a gradual descent, each step marked by an increasing desperation to maintain the illusion of control. On April 4, 1969, Velma had a fierce argument with her husband. Later that day, when she and the children were away, the house caught fire. Thomas, who remained inside, died from smoke inhalation, and the house was burned to the ground. Velma and the kids moved in with her parents. A few months after her husband's death, Velma started dating a widower, Jennings Barfield. They married in August 1970. One day, the couple had an argument, after which Jennings became mysteriously ill. On March 21, 1971, he died of a heart attack. Velma moved into her parents' home again. Soon after that, her father died of lung cancer. In the summer of 1974, her mother suffered severe stomach pain and was taken to the hospital. As she got better, she returned home. In August 1974, a man Velma was dating died in a car accident. On December 30th of the same year, her mother was taken to the hospital again with similar symptoms of a severe stomach illness. Doctors couldn't help her this time, nor could they diagnose her illness, and she died after 2 hours. No autopsy was performed. As mysterious deaths around Velma continued, her son Ronnie Burke said, "It's the saddest thing, but it seems like everybody my mother ever gets close to dies. How could the good Lord allow this to happen to a faithful Christian like Velma Barfield?" The financial strain of her addiction led to another unethical decision: forging checks to sustain her growing needs. But deceit has its price, and the trust within the community began to fray. Velma found herself trapped in a web of her own making. In 1975, she was convicted of 7 counts of writing bad checks and sentenced to 6 months in prison. However, she was released after serving 3 months. Upon her release in 1976, Velma took a job as a caretaker for the elderly. Initially, she worked for 94-year-old Montgomery Edwards and his 84-year-old wife, Dolly, in Lumberton, North Carolina. Montgomery fell ill and died on January 29, 1977. A few weeks later, in February, Dolly developed symptoms of a stomach illness similar to those of Velma's mother and died on March 1st. Velma then started looking after 76-year-old Record Lee, who had broken her leg. On June 4, 1977, Lee's husband, John Henry, began to suffer severe pains in his stomach and chest. Doctors diagnosed his condition as a severe stomach virus. He died later that month. Later in 1977, Velma moved in with her boyfriend, Roland Stewart Taylor, a relative of Dolly Edwards. He was a widower and tobacco farmer. One day, they were attending a Pentecostal revival meeting in Cumberland County. Suddenly, Stewart complained of severe stomach pain. He was taken to the hospital where he died after a few days. The search for truth begins in the quietest of ways. A question, a doubt, a pressing need for answers. Suspicion grew in the hearts of those who had watched Stewart's health decline under mysterious circumstances. It was their persistence that first brought the authorities to Velma's doorstep, initiating a chain of events that would lead to shocking revelations. An autopsy was ordered. The investigation into Stewart Taylor's death was methodical. Each test, each interview, each piece of evidence added another layer of suspicion around Velma. In the world of criminal investigations, breakthroughs often come with a faint clue, a moment of intuition, a connection previously unseen. For the team pursuing justice for Stewart Taylor and the other victims, it came in the form of forensic evidence. Arsenic became the linchpin in unraveling the mystery, traces of which were found in Stewart's system. Before the autopsy results were declared, Lumberton police received an anonymous phone call, reportedly from Velma's sister, who said that Velma had poisoned Taylor and others. Subsequently, Velma was arrested on charges of murdering Stewart Taylor. After her arrest, the body of Jennings Barfield was exhumed and traces of arsenic were found. The unraveling of Velma's carefully constructed lies began. The art of interrogation is delicate, a push and pull between investigator and suspect. Each question a probe into the darkest corners of the human heart. For Velma, the questions posed by her interrogators mirrored the ones she had long avoided within herself. It was in this room, under the weight of evidence and the scrutiny of the law, that the wall she had built to separate her actions from her conscience could no longer hold as the truth clawed its way to the surface. In search of solace, Velma turned to a spiritual advisor. It was in this desperate hope for redemption that she found the strength to confront her past. For her, The path to confession was a journey back to her soul. With a voice tinged with regret, Velma began to speak. A torrent of truths long dammed by fear, shame, and denial flowed forth. Her confession became a source of deep lasting pain for her own family, who were unwittingly caught in her web of deceit. The woman they loved and the horrible crimes she committed were now inseparably linked, challenging their notions of forgiveness, and the very foundations of their understanding of right and wrong. She confessed to poisoning Montgomery and Dolly Edwards, John Henry Lee, her mother Lillian, and her boyfriend Stuart Taylor. Despite the fact that arsenic was found in Jennings Barfield's body, Velma denied killing him. The motive for the murders was stealing money from her victims to support her clandestine addiction to prescription drugs. She had also taken out a loan in her mother's name. Each of her tragic choices, made under the influence of pain, had a devastating impact on her destiny and the people around her. Faced with the threat of exposure, Velma took a step that irrevocably altered the course of her life. The path from one crime to another can often be a slippery slope. She found herself repeating the unthinkable. Every time, Velma went to her victims' funerals and seemed to sincerely mourn their loss. The burden of her secret pushed her further into isolation. Yet the resilient human psyche, adept at self-preservation, often takes refuge in justification to shield itself from the unbearable truth and finds ways to rationalize even the darkest deeds. Every time Velma stole money from her victims, then poisoned them as they got suspicious. To the outside world, she remained a devout churchgoer, a seemingly caring nurse, and a loving family member. But her moral compass, once guided by faith, now veered into a realm of denial, caught in a constant struggle between the remnants of her conscience and the overwhelming desire to escape the consequences of her actions. She was forging checks on her boyfriend Stuart Taylor's account. Presumably, he discovered that, so she mixed an arsenic-based rat poison into his beer and tea, determined to maintain her secret at any cost. At the trial, Velma's defense pleaded insanity. This was not accepted. She appeared cold and uncaring. She laughed at the prosecutor and even gave the district attorney a round of applause after his closing speech. The prosecution painted a picture of Velma not as the church-going grandmother she purported to be, but as a calculating murderer driven by darkness. She was the architect of her own fate, and her actions deserved the utmost penalty. The defense, in turn, sought to humanize her, portraying her not as a monster, but as a troubled soul ensnared by addiction, abuse, and circumstances beyond her control, highlighting her mental health struggles as a mitigating factor in her crimes. In the world of law and order, the truth is often more complex than it appears, inseparable from human emotions. Although she eventually confessed to 6 murders, she was convicted only of the first-degree murder of Stuart Taylor in December 1978. The trial jury found aggravating circumstances and sentenced her to death. For the victims' families, the verdict was an acknowledgement of their irreplaceable loss. A designated holding area for female death row prisoners did not exist at the time, and Velma was the only female death row inmate in North Carolina. So she was imprisoned at Central Prison in Raleigh, in an area for escape-prone prisoners and prisoners with mental illnesses. Subsequently, a unit for female death row inmates was established at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women. While on death row, Velma was off the drugs and expressed remorse for the years that the pills had blurred her judgment and destroyed her moral compass. In the solitude of her cell, she began the arduous process of confronting her past. The nights were long, the faces of her victims haunted her dreams, and the silence served as a backdrop for her thoughts and regrets. It was during these moments of reflection that Velma faced the full magnitude of her actions, the lives she had taken, and the pain she had caused. Her conversations with the prison chaplain were not just about seeking forgiveness from a higher power, but about understanding the nature of atonement and the painstaking process of forgiving oneself. In jail, Velma confessed that she had never been a true Christian. Her Christianity had been a matter of form and gesture. Then, finally, while waiting for her trial, she genuinely opened her heart to Jesus and received forgiveness and salvation. She wrote in her autobiography, "All my life I was weighted down by my sins because I couldn't do better. It never occurred to me that Jesus really did pay the price, that Jesus alone bore the extreme punishment, death, for my sins, not just for my good neighbors, and even more glorious, Jesus is willing to be my friend even now. I can talk to him and he will listen." She became a devout Christian and spent her 6 final years ministering to other inmates. Velma, in her own way, became a source of support to them. Her involvement in spiritual activities offered her a sense of community and belonging that had eluded her for much of her life. Her extensive participation in the Christian community led to a campaign to have her sentence commuted from death to life imprisonment. She wrote letters to Governor Jim Hunt telling him that her born-again Christian faith should be considered as a mitigating factor. She received support from many Christians across the United States, including evangelists Billy and Ruth Graham. Ruth kept in touch with Velma by mail. Her victims' families considered Velma's conversion a fraud and a ploy to save her life. To them, she was a woman who had killed their loved ones. Velma remained a loving mother and a caring grandmother. She enjoyed family visits every weekend and spent time with her children and grandchildren. Her new attorney, Richard Burr, said about her, "The person I saw was kind, sensitive, and loving. There was no hidden agenda with Velma. Whenever you were with her, she was who she was. From what I understand, that's how she lived her life in prison. So from the very beginning, I believed that when she committed those crimes, it was not the Velma Barfield mentally and emotionally that I was seeing and getting to know." Burr believed that Velma's pretrial evaluations were inadequate, so he turned to psychiatrist Selwyn Rose. Dr. Rose evaluated Velma in 1980 and testified in the state court. He said that she suffered from 3 disorders: a multiple prescription drug abuse disorder, an underlying personality disorder, and depression. However, Dr. Rose never felt as if he had put together a complete picture of Velma. As Burr had no license to practice in North Carolina, he now assisted Velma's new lawyer, Jimmy Little. As time was running out, Velma's son, Ronnie Burke, asked her if she had killed his father. She replied, "I'm sure I probably did." She couldn't remember clearly, but she believed that she had left a cigarette or a match in the bed and then closed the door, leaving her drunk husband to sleep in their burning house. She also admitted to the pastor who helped her right woman on death row that she had murdered Jennings Barfield. Velma said she was glad that this was finally over because she was afraid that she was going to poison her grandchildren. She didn't know why she did it, but she did it, and it was not something she could stop. North Carolina's governor refused Velma's request for clemency and said that her victims had been literally tortured to death. Additionally, an appeal was made based on testimony from a psychiatry professor who asserted that she suffered from dissociative identity disorder. Professor Dorothy Lewis, professor of psychiatry at New York University School of Medicine and an expert in violent behavior, picked up patterns of manic episodes in Velma's earlier life associated with the development of a manic depressive disorder. She said she had talked to Velma's other personality, Billy, who told her Velma had been a victim of sexual abuse and that he, Billy, had killed her abusers. The judge responded to this by saying one of them did it. "I don't care which one." Velma's final appeal was filed on October 30th, 1984 in the North Carolina Supreme Court based on her being incompetent at her original trial due to her drug addiction. This appeal was denied in federal court. She told her attorney, Jimmy Little, to drop all appeals the day before she was executed, explaining that she wanted to die with as much dignity as the state of North Carolina will allow. Her last hours were spent in reflection and prayer, seeking comfort in her faith. As she was preparing for death, the famous Pastor Billy Graham told her over the phone, "Velma, in a way I envy you because you're going to get to heaven before I do." Velma was executed on November 2nd, 1984 at Central Prison in Raleigh. She released a statement before her execution. "I want to say that I am sorry for all the hurt that I have caused. I know that everybody has gone through a lot of pain, all the families connected, and I am sorry, and I want to thank everybody who has been supporting me all these 6 years. I want to thank my family for standing with me through all this, and my attorneys and all the support to me, everybody, the people with the prison department. I appreciate everything, their kindness and everything that they have shown me during these 6 years." As her last meal, she chose a bag of cheese doodles and a Coca-Cola. She received final visits from her family members and friends. She wasn't scared and told one of them, "When I go into that gas chamber at 2 a.m., it's my gateway to heaven." She was wearing pink pajamas for the execution. A stethoscope and heart monitor were taped to her chest. The wheeled gurney was brought to her cell, and she was fastened to it with straps across her body and legs. Then she was wheeled into the execution chamber shortly before 2 a.m. Crowds of pro- and anti-death penalty demonstrators gathered outside the prison. Some of the protesters accused Governor Hunt of refusing to show mercy and compassion, arguing that she could lead a life of value behind bars and help other prisoners. Richard Burr said, "Politics and death have been mixed up in this case." Inmates were banging rhythmically on the windows of their cells, waiting for the execution. About 80 people who were in favor of capital punishment cheered and applauded. The execution was carried out by 3 volunteers. One of the intravenous lines was a dummy so that none of the volunteers knew which of them actually administered the lethal dose. Velma was declared dead at 2:15 a.m., 15 minutes after being administered the injection of procuronium bromide. Observers at the execution reported that she passed away peacefully with no apparent suffering or pain. About 300 opponents of the death penalty stood in silent vigil carrying candles that were extinguished as the moment of the execution passed. At 2:25 a.m., Velma's body was taken to a medical school by an ambulance. She had requested that her organs be used for transplantation. She was buried in a small North Carolina cemetery near her first husband, Thomas Burke. She was 52 years old. Singer-songwriter Jonathan Byrd, the grandson of Jennings Barfield and his first wife, wrote a song about Velma. On May 25, 2009, an emergency call was to the services in Portland, USA, reporting a fire. When the fire was extinguished and firefighters the building, they discovered a horrifying scene. The room was surrounded by crosses and other religious objects. There lay a completely charred body. However, the most terrifying part was that the corpse was headless. Zoe Siraki was born on March 25, 1991 in Portland, located in Cumberland County, Maine, in the northwestern United States. She grew up with her loving parents John and Linda Siraki, her older brother Gregory, and two half-sisters from her father's side. Zoe always maintained good relationships with them. John Siraki was a builder, and thanks to his job, he supported the family well. From an early age, Zoe was surrounded by creative stimuli and showed a strong inclination towards art. She also loved animals and had 5 cats at home. As Zoe grew older, she became increasingly restless and curious. The idea of traveling and experiencing other cultures fascinated her. She also started following a vegan diet, consuming only vegetables while avoiding meat and animal products. This lifestyle included an ecological culture of protecting animals, the environment, and health. In 2005, Zoe started attending high school where she had a large group of friends who described her as a happy, joyful, and positive girl. In 2008, on her 17th birthday, surprised everyone with a decision that her parents did not like. She dropped out of school. Ken Coonan, the principal of the school Zoe attended, said that the girl refused to talk and discuss why she did not want to finish her junior year. Ken remembered Zoe as very nice and, according to him, her classmates spoke highly of her. He added that she interacted a lot with other energetic and creative young people like herself. A few months after Zoe dropped out of school, she began working at a local bakery and coffee shop named Bagelworks. On March 25, 2009, her 18th birthday, she eagerly awaited getting a tattoo on one of her arms. Zoe had always admired the Austrian artist Gustav Klimt's work, and when it came time to choose a tattoo design, she was inspired by his artistry. Little did she know that this decision, intended to mark her transition into adulthood, would introduce her to someone who would profoundly impact her future. Zoe knew exactly what she wanted on her arm, so she headed to a tattoo parlor in the Old Port area. There she met Chad Gurney, a 27-year-old tattoo artist. They seemed to connect instantly. A few days after their initial meeting, Zoe agreed to be Chad's girlfriend. The 9-year age difference didn't bother her at all. Chad was indeed a distinctive individual. He attended high school in Wells, Maine, where he made a name for himself as a lacrosse goalie, a sport involving 2 teams using small rubber balls and long-handled sticks. After high school, Chad moved to Lynchburg, Virginia to study at Liberty University. This institution is well known for being led by the famous evangelist, Pastor Jerry Falwell. Chad's body was adorned with numerous tattoos, each telling its own story. His skin featured dozens of drawings, most depicting aliens. One particularly striking piece was a gray-toned crocodile. In the realm of tattoos, alien imagery can signify 2 things: a belief in extraterrestrial beings, or a reflection of the wearer's sense of individuality, indicating they don't fit into this world but are unique and original. The reptile tattoo symbolized danger and hostility, a predator best avoided. In addition to his love for tattoos, Chad was also passionate about underground and alternative dance forms, known as hardcore dance. This genre involves intense and sometimes aggressive movements, but requires complete bodily control. It's not about self-harm. It's about releasing energy through various physical expressions like lunges, jumps, and acrobatic stunts that few dare to try. Those who knew Chad mentioned his struggle with recovering from a severe car accident 4 years prior before his move to Portland in 2005. His resilience painted him as both intriguing and complex, a man marked by his past, yet continuously moving forward towards new experiences. Chad suffered significant injuries in Alabama when the Liberty team was on their way to lacrosse game. Local van carrying both players and coaches was rear-ended by a car and forced into oncoming traffic where it collided with a large truck. The severe impact ejected Chad from the vehicle, leading to a near loss of his leg and necessitating approximately 20 surgeries. Due to a strong head injury, Chad underwent psychiatric evaluation, which revealed he had cognitive impairments affecting his speech, memory, and mathematical thinking. Chad gained financial independence through the seven-figure sum he received from a lawsuit following the accident. 2 years later, in 2007, he sought treatment for anxiety and depression, eventually being diagnosed with both an organic personality disorder and post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. In 2009, Chad traveled alone to Hawaii with plans to continue exploring the world. This passion for travel and curiosity about other cultures led him to meet Zoe. The couple adopted a relaxed and unconventional approach to their relationship. After they began dating, Zoe and Chad agreed on an open relationship, allowing them to see other people. In May 2009, Chad traveled again, this time for a weekend in Vancouver, Canada. Upon his return to Portland, Zoe admitted that she had been with another man during his absence and allegedly had sexual relations. Initially, it appeared that Chad was untroubled by this incident of infidelity due to their open relationship agreement. However, following this confession, Chad began insisting that Zoe quit her job and join him on a personal spiritual quest in Thailand. She declined his proposal without suspecting the grave outcome it could have. On May 25, 2009, Zoe visited Chad's apartment feeling very tired and decided to take a nap. While she was asleep, Chad grabbed her by the neck, struck her on the head, and strangled her until she ceased breathing. Then he engaged in sexual activity with Zoe's lifeless body before decapitating her. According to records, after committing the heinous crime, Chad took a shower, got dressed, and drove to the nearest gas station, where he filled a canister with gasoline. He returned to his apartment and doused Zoe's body on the lower floor with gasoline, laying a trail to the front door before igniting the fire. Chad took a backpack he had packed for a trip to Thailand, along with a laptop and shotgun. When the apartment caught fire, he went to an ATM, withdrew cash, and checked into the Old Orchard Beach Motel. There, he got into a jacuzzi and waited. Meanwhile, a call was made to 911 emergency services about the fire. Authorities responded immediately and were able to extinguish the flames. Upon entering the building, they were confronted with a horrific scene. Among the ashes lay a charred corpse surrounded by crosses and other religious items. A neighbor quickly called Chad to inform him that his house had burned down. The young man replied that he wasn't in town as he had gone to his hometown of Lewiston, and then quickly hung up the phone. On Tuesday, May 26th, Chad spoke with his best friend and confessed that he had killed Zoe. While explaining what happened, he seemed calm and rational. Chad said he was tired of the pain and couldn't restrain himself anymore. As he talked to his friend, he drove through the streets of Portland and carelessly ran a red light. A nearby city police officer stopped him. Chad insisted that his friend explain over the phone to the officer who had pulled him over that Chad had been in an accident in 2005, which might have caused mental health issues. After this interaction with the officer and talking to his friend, Chad went to the police and confessed to Zoe's murder. The police confiscated Chad's belongings, and on his computer's hard drive, a computer crimes investigator found a video recording labeled, "Woman half decapitated for suspected infidelity. At least if she cheated, she won't do it again." This evidence was later admitted in court on Wednesday, May 27th. At the high school where Zoe had studied, her memory was honored with a moment of silence during classes. Teachers and students were informed about the incident during lunch. That same day, a room was set up in the school where social workers and counselors were available for grieving students. After some time, Christine Koo, Zoe's stepsister, made the first statement on behalf of the family. She told local media journalists that she wanted the public to know this was an unusual murder, because Chad had committed many evil acts. According to Christine, detectives told her that in a rage, Chad had attacked Zoe, sexually violated her body, and set it on fire. Then he calmly went to a motel and got into a jacuzzi. A week after Zoe's murder, on Tuesday, June 2nd, 2009, a vigil was held in front of the apartment building where Chad had lived. It was a moment of consolation for Zoe's friends and family. Many strangers shocked and outraged by the brutal crime also attended. Estimates suggest that over 150 people gathered to pray and remember Zoe. They also placed candles and flowers on the steps of the building where her life was tragically cut short. Zoe's father JN and her stepsister Courtney came to the scene of the tragedy and were touched by the support of so many people. Meanwhile, the police began interviewing Chad's friends and acquaintances, who agreed that the young man had a split personality. According to them, he sometimes portrayed himself as a person on a spiritual quest, with religious artifacts throughout his apartment and plans to travel to Thailand to study Eastern religions. Some said that Chad was kind and charming, often giving people small gifts. They mentioned that he often spoke of wanting to use money he received from an accident for the good of humanity. At the same time, Chad enjoyed his image as a tough guy with tattoos covering his arms and provocative confrontational behavior. Robert Collins, a 24-year-old chef, noticed something peculiar about Chad. When Chad attended parties, people often shrugged and turned away. Robert recalled Chad once confiding in him that the only thing he identified with was pain. He even remembered that Chad had this word tattooed on his knuckles. Police and prosecution made significant efforts to gather information about the brutal crime. Deputy Attorney General Bill Stokes reported that the judge had ordered the seizure of court documents. Steve Weir, who rented an apartment from Chad in 2006, was also questioned. He mentioned seeing religious paintings and artifacts in Chad's apartment and said Chad expressed an interest in theology but did not practice it. Watson Atkinson, owner of another tattoo parlor in Portland, shared that Chad once confessed he wanted to use his accident compensation to find himself. Watson added that Chad seemed overly focused on teenage girls. This concerned him so much that he forbade his 16-year-old daughter from interacting with Chad. Watson also noted that none of Chad's close acquaintances could have imagined how dark his thoughts were. During the initial investigation, Chad's prior medical history and mental health diagnoses were revealed. However, while in custody, several psychologists evaluated Chad and found no evidence of delusions or hallucinations. In conversations with specialists, Chad admitted having strong feelings regarding Zoe's infidelity and expressed disappointment over it. According to court documents, he claimed to be weary of the infidelity of all his girlfriends. These conversations revealed a depressed individual who began contemplating taking Zoe's life after she confessed her unfaithfulness to him. Chad told 3 different psychologists that he engaged in sexual acts with her remains because he believed he had already committed a terrible act and was contemplating what worst thing he could do next. When his trial began, a 127-minute police interrogation conducted 12 hours after the crime was leaked. During the interrogation with Detective Danham, Chad said that he and Zoe got along very well. He noted that she occasionally stayed in his apartment for about a week and that they had no arguments. Chad claimed they were soulmates and that she always tried to be honest with him. He stated that he had taken the life of the most beautiful girl he ever knew and added that he owed it to his 18-year-old victim to tell the truth. During the conversation with the detective, Chad remained composed, constantly apologized, and cried several times. Chad recounted that on May 25, 2009, Zoe was napping. According to him, he approached and began to strangle her. She tried to fight for her life and screamed for him to stop. Chad said that when Zoe tried to resist, he hit her on the head and continued to strangle her until she stopped breathing. He then described the atrocities he committed with her body. At this point in the interrogation, Chad stated that he used 3 knives, not a samurai sword as initially thought, for the decapitation. He added that he then placed a cross between her legs and talked about everything he did while her body burned in the apartment. Describing the events, Chad constantly called himself a terrible person. When asked why he decapitated Zoe, he replied that he was trying to turn her death into a ritual of forgiveness. When asked why he did it, Chad struggled to find an answer. He then stated that he felt possessed and that on the day of Zoe's murder, everything in his life dimmed. He explained that for several hours he became a wild, primitive beast in his basic instincts, and that's why he committed such a monstrous act. This interrogation became an important piece of evidence presented in Cumberland County Supreme Court during the initial hearings. Prosecutors played the entire 2.5-hour recording for Judge Roland Cole. There was discussion that Chad faced a minimum of 25 years in prison and a maximum of life imprisonment. During one of the hearings in 2011, it was proposed that acknowledging his mental disorder could result in his transfer to a psychiatric center in Austria. It was established that the accused had strangled the victim in a fit of anger. However, it remained uncertain whether Chad, who waived his right to a jury trial, agreed with this at the time. Pruers argued that the former Liberty University student and lacrosse champion was fully aware of his actions. They brought in a psychiatrist and psychologist to testify about Chad's mental state. All of them concluded that the young man knew what he was doing and understood his decision to brutally kill his girlfriend. The defense, however, continued to emphasize Chad's mental health issues, arguing that he was ashamed and afraid of losing control over himself. On January 11, 2012, Chad's attorney tried to convince the Supreme Court to dismiss evidence found on his client's personal computer at the time of arrest. This evidence included a gruesome video where Chad explained how to decapitate an unfaithful woman. The defense contended that this video should not have been admitted into evidence. In March 2012, nearly 3 years after the egregious crime, 30-year-old Chad Gurney was sentenced to 50 years for the murder of Zoe Siraki and 25 years for arson. The judge ordered these sentences be served consecutively. Chad's lawyers filed an appeal against the sentence, but it was rejected. Zoe's family had hoped for a life sentence. During sentencing, the presiding judge stated it was clear that the defendant did not perceive reality normally. However, the issue was whether he understood his actions were wrong. Sarah Churchill, Chad's attorney, argued before the Supreme Court that brain concussions and other injuries from a 2005 accident left her client in a constant state of delusion. She claimed the judge erred by finding Chad guilty because the search warrant should not have extended to his smartphone, laptop, and social media pages. Churchill argued that instead of considering evidence from these devices, significant weight should have been given to evidence regarding Chad's side psychosis and alienation at the time of the crime. The Deputy Attorney General countered by stating that Chad killed Zoe in retaliation for her infidelity, which he deemed dishonored as betrayal. The deputy noted that no information from social networks was used against Chad, and concluded there was overwhelming evidence proving he knew what he did during the crime. Afterward, Zoe's aunt, Kathy Kozev, told journalists she felt breathless seeing and hearing him during trial, recalling her niece's agonizing final moments vividly. Shannon Claire LeBeau was born on October 31, 1975 in Miller, South Dakota. His mother, Sally LeBeau, was from California and married a man named Gerald Anderson and had 5 children. In 1966, Gerald was struck by a piece of heavy equipment in a construction accident and died at the age of 30. Sally became widowed at the age of 28 and became solely responsible for her 5 children, who ranged in age from 6 months to 8 years. She then packed up and resettled on a friend's farm in South Dakota. There she met Val Claire LeBeau, nicknamed Blondie. He was a postal carrier and the two would have 2 more children, Shannon in 1975 and Josh in 1977. Val Claire possessed a Jekyll and Hyde personality and was an alcoholic. He was a Vietnam vet and suffered from hallucinations and flashbacks, especially when he drank. Eventually, Sally would also work at the post office, divorce Blondie, and transfer from South Dakota to another post office in Thousand Oaks. Her father was there, dying of cancer, and she wanted to be nearby to take care of him. Only Sally, Shannon, and his younger brother Josh would move with her to California. The rest of Sally's older children remained in South Dakota. Sally again soon filed transfer requests and ultimately moved to Helena, Montana, where she eventually bought a small house at the 10 Mile Creek Estates. Shannon, a sophomore in high school who was very close to his mother, longed for a bond with his father, and he even once convinced Sally to allow him and Josh to move back to South Dakota to live with him. Within months, he and Josh began to resent their father because of his behavior. So Shannon and Josh would return to Helena, and he would try his best to readjust to Helena High School. Shannon and Steve Rummel met while they were students at the high school. The two often lifted weights together at the gym, but Steve had a bad reputation. The more reserved and less confident Shannon would become a follower of Steve and his actions. Shannon graduated from high school in 1994, and a few years later, he met a girl named Leslie and the couple had a baby girl, but they would never marry. The pair fought frequently and at times, their arguments were volatile. For starters, Leslie didn't like Shannon's choice of friends, particularly his association with Steve. Shannon and Steve would drink at dingy places and would get into arguments when Shannon stopped his generosity and refused to buy Steve additional drinks. Leslie and Shannon would split up, and she told him that he needed to grow up, take on more responsibility, and be more serious about accepting his role as a father. Around that time, Shannon and his own father became further estranged. When Blondie visited his newborn granddaughter, the visit did not end on a good note. Shannon began working as a cook at a busy sports bar in Helena. At one point, his ex-girlfriend Leslie indicated that she was considering returning to Helena with their daughter after a period of estrangement. Shannon was last seen on February 23, 1999, between 9 and 11 a.m. in the vicinity of the 900 block of Kessler Street in downtown Helena. Security cameras recorded him at a local bank around 9 a.m., where he withdrew about $3,000 in cash from the sale of his black Chevy Nova. According to reports, Steve had told Shannon that there was an old farmer who owned a muscle car somewhere close to Townsend, a car that he might like. Steve picked up Shannon, and in his initial statement to the police, he testified that they left Helena to scope out the vehicle and on the way shoot a couple cows. In his initial statement, he told police that he and Shannon were together in the Walking Mall area at about 11 a.m. Steve told Shannon's mom that after they returned from Townsend, he dropped Shannon off in downtown Helena at about 11 a.m. Steve also told Sally that Shannon relayed message through him to his mother that she should go lock up his mobile home and pick up his checks from work. Clearly, Shannon intended to go to Townsend and either view or purchase a car from an acquaintance of Steve's. According to multiple witnesses, Shannon had been very excited about buying the vehicle. 2 days before Shannon's disappearance on February 21, 1999, Steve had asked a friend whether they had a pistol that he could borrow, as he needed to help a rancher kill a cow. According to investigative reports, Steve told multiple different stories of the day Shannon disappeared. He told one group of people that he dropped Shannon off in downtown Helena, and yet another that he had taken Shannon to the bus station in Butte because Shannon was afraid of someone that he owed money to. Another witness stated that Steve said that he drove clear to Billings and dumped his friend off there. Shannon's red 1976 Chevrolet truck with the Montana license plate number 5T31420 apparently disappeared with him and has never been recovered. Steve has a very extensive criminal history. His first felony conviction dates back to 1994 on a theft charge. Since then, he has had arrests for obstructing a police officer, unlawful transaction with a minor, domestic abuse, tampering with or fabricating evidence, concealed weapons violations, and numerous probation violations. According to reports, Steve often made fun of Shannon and his hair, called him a girl, and used Shannon's friendship for his own benefit. Steve also allegedly threatened to kill a woman and stated that his older brother was a high priest of Satan worshippers, who had previously disposed of bodies. According to witness depositions, after Shannon vanished, Steve frequented the sports bar where Shannon worked, inquiring about the investigation. Shannon's disappearance has been treated as a homicide from the beginning. On June 8, 1999, Steve showed up at a used car lot in Helena and traded in the vehicle that he owned at the time of Shannon's disappearance, an orange 1976 Chevrolet pickup truck. When the Helena police confiscated that vehicle for crime lab analysis, the truck had been cleaned and detailed within the last few days. 2 days after the police returned the vehicle to the car dealer's lot, it was stolen. There was no broken glass in the lot, and it is assumed that the person who stole the vehicle had an extra set of keys. It has never been seen since. Searches have been conducted using cadaver dogs on foot and also by air. Authorities have searched streams and ditches, mine shafts and dark holes, even the cement plant that once employed Steve's father. 1 year after Shannon's disappearance, Steve Rummel was detained on a sexual assault charge. In a federal court appearance in 2001, he was remanded to the custody of the marshals after a detention hearing where a Helena police officer testified that the only real lead in Shannon's case led to Steve. He served his time on the sexual assault charge, and as a habitual violent offender, he must register his whereabouts with the state of Montana and apparently still lives there. Sadly, Shannon's mother died from cancer in 2007, shortly after Shannon was declared legally dead. In 2019, his daughter welcomed a son into the world. Earlier that same year, at her wedding celebration in Idaho, an empty chair was placed at the front row of the main aisle for her father. As of today, Shannon has never been found, and this case remains unsolved.